Morning everyone. So today I am going to make a brief video about the structural changes which can happen in trauma survivors. So as you can see, you are seeing superior view of the brain, and if you have followed my previous videos, you would have realized what acute stress reaction does to the brain and how brain reacts to traumatic events like war, rape, life-threatening accidents, child sexual abuse. So any of such traumatic events. So as you can see now, the front part of the brain is called the frontal pole, and this part is what lies behind the eyes. So this is responsible for the higher executive functions like thinking, planning, execution of multiple tasks. So going from here, if you flip the brain over, so this is what you are going to see. So all the nerves which are coming out of the brain and all the cranial nerves which are arising from the brain. So here the frontal area is very clear. So this is the frontal lobe, and this area is called the prefrontal cortex, which is very, very important for the regulation of emotions. And this is the temporal lobe, and this is very important for the function of memory. So if you see this picture of ventricles of the brain, so the ventricles are channels which carry the cerebrospinal fluid inside, and also they cushion the brain. So this picture depicts the ventricles. So right above this ventricle, right in this area, there is an area called amygdala. Amygdala is an almond-shaped organ which is the brain's center for recording emotions, and also in priming memory which are emotionally loaded. So whichever memories have a huge emotional component, they will be coded in a much different and a much stronger way than a non-emotional memory. For example, if you see a bus on the road, you might remember seeing the bus, but it is not an emotional memory, right? But if you see your favorite uncle or an aunt getting down from the bus after a very long time, probably 2 years of the pandemic, then that has an emotional component. So this memory of your uncle getting down from the bus will have a stronger encoding, emotionally primed encoding compared to the passing bus on the road while you're walking on the road. So if the amygdala is here, right below it will be the hippocampus. Hippocampus in Greek means seahorse. So it's a seahorse shaped organ. So it is responsible for the encoding, the storage of memories. So it is also called as the brain's historian. So if we remember the story of our life, that is stored in the hippocampus right here below this horn. So amygdala is here and the hippocampus is here. And as I already mentioned, the prefrontal cortex is here. So whenever the trauma occurs to anybody, like what I had told earlier, so the brain remembers the trauma. But what happens is, whenever there is a traumatic event, the brain's flight or fight mode will be activated. The amygdala senses the danger, then there will be a rush of cortisol and adrenaline to the body, and the body will be immediately put into an autonomic nervous system mode called fight or flight. So when this happens, the hippocampus will be underactivated in severe traumatic events. The hippocampus will not be able to effectively record the factual details, but the emotion encoding is very, very strong due to amygdala activation. So this coupling which happens, amygdala overactivation and also hippocampal underactivation in trauma, make the trauma memories very unique compared to other memories. So the trauma memory will be usually encoded as an intense unpleasant emotional event rather than a factual event. So the trauma memory will not be like a coherent story. So if you ask a accident survivor as to how the accident happened, they may not remember all the details, in a factual way, but they do remember how they felt emotionally during that point. So what happens because of this encoding is the memory is so much primed by the amygdala that it keeps recurring. So we call this flashback. After the trauma happens, the flashbacks are common. So flashback is an involuntary memory retrieval mechanism where the trauma event will be retrieved without the volition of the person experiencing it. So it comes on its own. They remember on its own. But usually it will be in fragments. So it is not like a coherent memory. So it also brings hypervigilance and hyperarousal because of the amygdala activation. So what do we mean by hypervigilance and hyperarousal? So the brain, the amygdala becomes very sensitive to the triggers. For example, if a person has had domestic abuse, okay, and ex-husband, if he had a red car, okay, even though the person may not be in that marriage anymore, the sight of a red car may trigger off memories of violence. So that is how the amygdala gets triggered, and the amygdala, because of repeated such memories and also the experience of trauma, the amygdala tends to increase in size, and the prefrontal cortex, which is usually involved in modulating the emotional responses to such memories, then generally it can undergo a shrinkage. So trauma not only has emotional component, it has structural components for the brain, so structural changes in the brain, and this has been proven via various imaging studies. So the hippocampus is not able to effectively retrieve the memory, and the amygdala encodes the memory in a very emotional way but not in a factual way, and the prefrontal cortex, which is actually the policeman who screens emotional stimuli and one's response to it, generally gets less powerful in the case of trauma. So the flashbacks happen without the conscious volition of the patient, and when the traumatic memories flood the brain, the person may feel that the event is actually recurring in reality. So they may have an element of dissociation, they may not stay in the current moment, they may actually feel like they're back in the moment of abuse. So it is a very painful and intense memory. It causes a lot of anxiety, and the major feature of trauma is heightened anxiety levels that the trauma may occur again. So the brain develops various avoidance responses due to the mediation of amygdala. Avoidance responses means that the person doesn't want to go out alone, the person avoids everything which can lead to similar circumstances as the traumatic event. So these are the structural changes which can happen to the brain, and when we dismiss somebody's traumatic event as just, it was a bad thing, you have to forget it and all that, please do not forget that it has serious consequences for brain functioning and also brain structure. So thank you for your patient listening, and I hope to make more videos which illuminate the subject of trauma. Thank you very much.